Inside California Politics. This is a dangling conversation about California government and politics. It's been going on for about a decade or a bit longer now, and we welcome all of you to participate in this ongoing discussion about California. I'm very pleased to introduce and have join us our Congressmember Jimmy Panetta. Jimmy, it is always a pleasure to see you, sir. I'm going to give a shout out on behalf of, I hope, Jimmy and myself. Jimmy last night was at the Santa Cruz Warriors G League basketball game, and that's like the AAA baseball of the NBA. And Jimmy was handing out a congressional certificate of recognition for the Santa Cruz Warriors, which received the Franchise of the Year award from the National Basketball Association for the way they run their operation and so on. And shall we say you received a warm reception there, Congressmember, and then they went on to win the game. I don't know, is there something magic there? How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Well, I'm actually, I don't know if I'd be excited by that overtime win or exhausted from them. But I do got to say, prior to me giving that certificate, they were losing by about 10 points. And something inspired them. I don't know what it was. Maybe reminding them what it means to live in Santa Cruz and play and represent Santa Cruz, and that you got to do more than just win on the court, but win in our community. And that's what the Santa Cruz Warriors do. That's for sure. And that's why they got that award. That's what the award was about. And I tried to, as much as the fans were cheering, I was surprised how much the fans were appreciative of that certificate when I announced it. And like I said, I just tried to let them know that this is an organization that's provided over 50,000 meals to families in need. They did it throughout the pandemic, and that was a big reason why they got that. But it's the second year in a row they've got this award. So it really says something about the way Chris Murphy, the president, is running it and what they bring to the community. But yeah, that was a hell of a game.
It was all the fun you can have. Yes, sir. That was good.
Yeah, that was great. I do admit it was only my first time at a game this year, but what a game to hit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, thank you for being there. And I concur. The Santa Cruz Warriors is the best thing that's happened to Santa Cruz since the arrival of the University of California in terms of what it has done with the community. And it's more than basketball, a lot more than basketball. That's and the way these young men, they serve our community as well, the way they're engaged in reading programs and beach cleanups and a whole range of activities, and they're earnest about it. I'll say this, given the way politics is so divisive right now in our nation, to see something happen in a community where all the politics is checked at the door, everybody's a Santa Cruz Warrior fan, you see the players out in the community, everybody's supportive of these young men who are this is a strong character and working hard. It's a wonderful thing to see everybody can find common ground and support in something that's really community building at its heart. So thank you for being part of that and recognizing that. Let me move to something much less pleasant, and I would be remiss if I didn't start with this, and that is the terrible situation going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which seems to be testing the efficacy of the 70-year history of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as well as to another degree, the European Union. A whole range of issues are implicated in this. I'm reading a book right now on all of the implications around the First World War, and there is an eerie echo of history. Russia's imperialist tendencies or rebuilding of the empire in some way, shape, or form, but the 11th century strategies of pounding civilian cities into rubble, creating enormous humanitarian needs, and finding a way for liberal democracies to be able to fight back on this threat effectively without triggering a third world war. My goodness, it's all very, very overwhelming emotionally. And I think in terms of our nation, what is the right course of action and so on. So you have been in theater in war. You have been a member of Congress now during this period of time. And I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts and observations about this terrible tragedy and this unnecessary war.
Yeah, obviously, you hear about certain quotes, and the best quote that I've heard so far, and I really think it kind of stems all of our reactions from this, are that Vladimir Putin said that when he invaded Ukraine, he said that Ukraine wasn't a nation. He made it a nation. And I believe that, seeing the response of the Ukrainians has really kind of directed our policy. Now, I have to say the administration has done a pretty excellent job when it comes to how they are ensuring, how they are participating in a war without participating in a war. Is what it comes down to. And so looking what they did at first to pre-bunk, not debunk, but pre-bunk the disinformation that Vladimir Putin was relying on prior to his invasion for false flags or having a reason to invade was really something that was unprecedented. The release of intelligence by the IC, by the United States, to pre-bunk the disinformation that literally, as we've seen, Russia relies on as a fundamental component as to how they operate, be it in warfare, be it in hybrid warfare, be it in war times, be it normal times. This has become a cornerstone of how they operate. And the fact that we've realized that, we're learning slowly, but learning slowly how to counter that with the truth, with the facts, with intelligence, I think is something that is a method that we're probably going to employ and deploy a lot sooner next time we have to deal with this, or as a way of dealing with this disinformation in the future. But then, obviously, seeing once the invasion occurred and what we've done to ensure that being very careful not to corner this tiger, not to corner Vladimir Putin. It's not punch back, but slowly help the Ukrainians push back is what it is. And that's obviously because we're dealing with a nuclear power.
Yes.
How do we have to make sure that he doesn't go to that level all the way? He doesn't bring us into this war. He doesn't escalate. And so it's a slow pushback. But I think what we've seen is that, and it goes to your point about Russia's history, that this was an attempt by Vladimir Putin to restore the glory of the Russian Empire. But clearly, what he's done instead is he's reinvoked the terror of Stalin, as The Economist, basically, that was their headline the other day, and I agree with that. And he's actually made some pretty catastrophic errors, is what we're seeing. And it all comes down to certain things that he's misjudged. He's underestimated the will of the Ukrainians. He overestimated the power of the Russian military, or the adeptness of the Russian military. And he underestimated the resolve of the United States and its leadership, clearly. Now, look, I think it's quite, it's really, you talk about partisanship. I can tell you, I haven't seen a Congress so unified in my limited time about a certain issue, but helping Ukrainians. I haven't heard as many constituents call my office and be so unified about us wanting to help Ukrainians. I mean, I have, every week I get this readout of all the calls of all the people who called my office or emailed my office I can tell you 90% of this week, and this is about a 45-page document that I look over every week, 90%, normally it's not that big, first of all. Second of all, 90% of these about supporting the Ukrainian people. And, obviously, they don't really necessarily, some have ideas, but more it's about just support the Ukrainian people. And I think that's the balance that we have to have going forward of how we support the Ukrainian people without going to war with Russia. That's what it comes down to right now. Supporting the Ukrainian people, not going to war with Russia. How are we supporting the Ukrainian people? Well, we're basically providing aid and armaments, and we're doing that in a way that has kind of grown. You started off with a $6 billion. The package we passed and the president signed in Congress was $13.6 billion, half going to humanitarian aid for refugees, the other half going to armaments for the Ukrainians. Trust me, they know how to fight. They're fighting. And President Zelensky said this to Democrats and Republicans, Congress members and senators in that live feed speech. They have the will. They just need the armaments to do it. And so I think that's something we definitely are going to continue to do as we go forward. Now, the question though, Fred, the question that we have to ask ourselves, because knowing Vladimir Putin, or at least we think where he's going, and that's only up, because I don't see an off-ramp here for him. I believe that if he took an off-ramp right now, he is lost. He has sullied the reputation of Russia on the world stage. He's ruined the reputation of the Russian military. He's crumpled the ruble. He's crippled the Russian economy. I mean, if he stopped now, complete failure. So where's he going to go? That is the question. And that's the fear that we have to be mindful of what is escalation and how do we counter that? So the question that we have to ask is, look, we understand that this is going to be a war of insurgency. I believe that, and that we're going to have to continue to support the Ukrainian people. But what is that balance to make sure he doesn't act like that cornered tiger and escalates this to the use of a weapon of mass destruction in Ukraine? He doesn't attack a NATO country under the guise of a false flag. But if he does, what is our reaction? Now, right. The president has talked about severe consequences and so forth, and is, having a hard time articulating exactly what that is, but without trying to say what that is, because you don't want to say what that is. But that is, I believe, something we need to think through as a country and as a constituency. What do we do? As much support as we have for the people of Ukraine, if a weapon of mass destruction is deployed against them, what do we do as a country? How much longer do we stand by and watch these types of atrocities take place going forward, beyond providing the aid and the armaments that we're doing now? And so that is something that it's a serious question that all of us need to consider going forward. I do believe that this administration is thinking that way in its reactions. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go toe to toe. You have to fight back with the same type of weapons. You have to get involved militarily with Russia. We've obviously deployed sanctions. We can make them tighter. We know that as well. There's other ways to go about that I think are necessary, and you really have to think through going forward. So we've done a lot. A lot has been done in Ukraine by Russia. The United States has responded, I believe, appropriately. But I do believe that this is something that's not going away. We're not even talking about what's going on domestically, with here in this country in regards to our prices and inflation. But, this is something where I believe this is something, unless Putin goes away, we are in this for the long haul.
Thank you for that. Let me ask a couple of questions, if I could follow up on that. One is, we talk about this in your characterization of it. It was the United States and Russia, the United States and Russia. Now, our direct interest in this is tied to our participation in NATO and Article 5 in there, which, how many people could have told you what Article 5 was 6 weeks ago? But now a lot of people know what Article 5 is. But if what happens is that there are at least two countries which are NATO countries immediately adjacent to Russia and Ukraine. And then there are others which are non-aligned, so to speak. But the very real notion of something going amiss and landing in a NATO country, or what could fairly be characterized as an act of war against a NATO country, that's not out of the realm of possibility. It would seem to me, either by design or by accident. And then the trigger, so to speak, is pulled, and we're now in this, even if we had desired to have limited participation, do what we can that doesn't expand the war, trigger it. But if it is it your belief that the United States, and led by the administration in this case, would react as a full participant in invoking Article 5 of the NATO agreement?
This is why I mentioned escalation. And this is a legitimate and very real thing that I know this administration is thinking about, we in Congress are thinking about. But also, like I said, the American people need to start thinking about it a little bit more as well, at least sort of think this through as to, like I said, I get your unity now behind Ukraine. You bet. And you know what? We want to punch Putin in the face. That's I'm feeling that from my constituents who are calling. But what is our appropriate response if there is escalation? Now, let's look at the types of escalation there could be. I mean, obviously, Putin facing defeat could launch a small-scale nuclear weapon in Ukraine. He could do what you just said in regards to either a miscalculation or a false flag, something to give him reason, created reason to attack a NATO country. Or is there something of a smaller weapon of mass destruction, or a chemical weapon, I should say? There really is no small weapon of mass destruction. Is there, launch of a WMD within Ukraine, like a chemical weapon? Like I said, I think that people have to think through what are the responses there. And I like your delineation between a NATO country versus Ukraine. This has kind of got what we got to think through. But I think the president's made it pretty clear that if there is a NATO country that is encroached on in a violent way, you're going to see consequences. And I think that's something the president has said, and I believe, look, as I said, there was an underestimation of the United States and its leadership and the NATO resolve by Vladimir Putin. Okay. And that's understandable. Look at what we've been through in the last 2 decades, from the exhaustion of our war on terror, the lack of meeting the red line in Syria by President Obama, President Trump maligning and expressing a desire to get out of NATO, our debacle of a withdrawal from Afghanistan. You kind of look at those things, you kind of see America's pulling back. But, Biden's done nothing but lead on this. And so I do believe that type of response is necessary, that if you have an Article 5 and if there is an attack on a NATO country, you have to stand firm in that. And you have to live up to that obligation. And it's not just, like you said, like you were going, it's not just the United States. It's other countries in NATO. It's all of those countries. And so I do think that's very important. Now, you raise a good question of, let's say if it's not a NATO country, what happens? My supposition is that if there is anything beyond the borders of Ukraine, you would see a similar response.
Thank you for that, Jimmy. Appreciate it. I was talking to someone yesterday who was very concerned about the geopolitical gravitational forces right now, which seem to be pulling Russia and China closer into each other's orbit. And I remember I was telling someone last night that when I was a junior in high school in 1968, so yes, you just did the arithmetic in your brain. Yes, I'm a very old man. But remember, a junior in high school, I was at a debate meet, and the question in front of us was, what do you think the effects are in the United States of the Sino-Soviet split? And so, this is, they're together, they're apart, they're together, they're apart. But in 1968, when that happened, China was nothing near the economic power and military power that it is today. Their economic growth has gone like a hockey stick. And those two powers together, it makes sense why President Biden was on the phone with President Xi for almost an hour the other day, talking about don't get too cozy with these folks because you're in our radar as well in terms of sanctions or whatever it might be. Seems to me that on the horizon of looking beyond the immediate, which is hard to do given how tragic and horrible it is, but looking just a little bit up on the horizon, saying this opportunity where China and Russia can move closer together in their economic and military relationship seems to be a buttress for Putin against the Western democracy sanctions. So I'm no foreign policy expert, just talking about things, but tell me what your thoughts are about that particular dynamic going on.
The question that I've heard is, what is the post Cold War era going to look like? Mm-hmm. And obviously, there is this fear that you see it sort of, develop into this regional Cold War of China and Russia coming together. I think China is kind of scratching its head on this one, because I think they're a country that likes stability. All they've tried to do is create, considering the instability with their own people, they want to create stability not just within China, but whatever they're doing outside of China. And so they rely on stability. So I think they're starting to realize that, them being tied to Russia isn't good for them internationally, especially the way it's transpiring right now, what's going on in Ukraine. But also, I think it's making them realize and recalculating the cost of what would happen if they wanted to fulfill their stated goal of taking over Taiwan. In the sense that they're seeing the economic sanctions. They're seeing the effect on the Russian economy. Now, mind you, they have different economies, of course. Yes. Russia, as John McCain said, is a gas station covered up as a country. We know that. It really is reliant on its fossil fuels. But the fact is that I do believe that China is still kind of looking at that, knowing that there will be a hit economically, knowing that we could freeze its $3.3 trillion in reserves that it has. That's a heck of a lot of money that they have in reserves that we could get after. And so I believe there's sort of a recalculation there. Now, I also believe, and I heard this, I love this saying, that the way we look at it is that in looking at how we look at the world affairs, Russia is a tsunami, China is climate change. But you also have to realize, because of their relationship that you saw in that 5,000-page document of relationship, whatever they wanted to call it, besides an ally, besides an alliance, a defeat to Russia is sort of a burden to China, is sort of a defeat to China. And I think they're starting to realize that. And so I think that's something of how we look at what's going on internationally with that relationship is still something that China is smart enough to realize that certainty and stability is how it's been able to succeed for the past, couple decades, and grow for the past couple decades. And all they have is time. We know that. They know that. They're relying on that. And that's why I do believe that they're sort of recalculating any sort of serious connection to Russia going forward. But that's also why we in the United States need to ensure that Russia comes away from this as quote unquote defeated.
Thank you. Stay with this subject for a second. Is another way for China to look at this if what happens is that this is constrained to, contained to Ukraine, whether Russia, quote, wins or loses, isn't a message for China if it stays the way it is, and which is to say, this is a battle between Russia and Ukraine, and it doesn't expand. And then it turns into this long haul war of attrition. Isn't another way for China to look at this, given their Belt and Road policy, given their desire to build artificial islands in the China Sea and then put military installations on these phony baloney islands and so on? Isn't a way for them to look at this and say, you can actually get away with this? You're left with a pile of rubble, but you can get away with this. The Western democracies aren't, if you're not a NATO country, they're not going to go in and face you up militarily. They may give you sanctions, all kinds of other things, but, or you think that as they're recalibrating, they recalibrate, as you said in your previous comment, the other way?
I think the other way, Fred. I really do. I think they're looking at this going, this is not what we want. This may not be worth it for them. Now look, we know how they feel towards Taiwan, and that's obviously, the kind of analogy that people used early on is that, Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. But like I said, I do believe that they are starting to look at other aspects, learning from this, to be honest with you, and maybe recalculating some of the costs, some of the financial costs, as well as their reputation on the international stage. They're seeing how much pushback, how much support there is for the Ukrainian people, that this is something that I'm not sure if this is something they necessarily want to deal with right now. So I see them kind of relying on their reliance on time rather than focusing on the necessity of immediately taking over Taiwan because of the repercussions financially, but also internationally, politically.
Thank you. Let's exhale for a second and move beyond that tragedy and move to something that is at least potentially quite a bit more positive, and that is that you and your colleagues and the president have enacted a very large infrastructure bill, and it is going to be appropriating billions of dollars over the next several years for a wide variety of infrastructure issues, from issues around climate change and how you get the infrastructure to deal with that, rebuilding roads, bridges, highways, transportation corridors, all the rest of it. I am fond of saying there's no partisanship in a pothole, but there's a hell of a lot of politics in a pothole. So as this money is heading out over the next half decade, most of it looks like, California is the largest state in the nation, and with underfunded attention to our infrastructure, despite the fact that voters in California agreed to raise their own gas taxes to self-help, in effect, the state of California in dealing with at least the transportation sector to some considerable degree. I'm wondering how you see the infrastructure bill affecting California generally and the Central Coast. Is this going to be something noticeable within the next 3 or 4 years? Or is the spread so thin that that sounds like a big number, and it is, but when will we be feeling, seeing, enjoying the benefits of a very large infrastructure bill?
If I was Joe Biden, it better be tomorrow.
It better be tomorrow.
I'm serious. I firmly believe that
if you were Joe Biden, you could actually probably get reelected. But anyway,
I don't know about that.
But Joe Biden, I'm not sure. But
but seriously, politically, he needs this investment to be felt sooner rather than later. For us in the House, hopefully by late summer,
of this year, to be honest with you. And for him, come 2024, hopefully by late summer of 2024. I mean, this is something that's got to get out there. Let me just go through some numbers here and let you know how big of an infrastructure investment bill this is. And this is something that was completely, this is something that hadn't been done. Look, I can, we've all heard about the joke of Infrastructure Week of the ex-president and the last administration, and that was a joke because that's all they did was talk about it. This president, in a bipartisan fashion, actually got it done, which is one hell of a feat, and it's a very, very big bill, 1.7 trillion for roads, for bridges, for broadband, for wildfire projects, for electric vehicle charging stations, for ports, for waterways, for airports. But to your question, more importantly, what can we expect to see here in California? This is where it's kind of going to start. And these are some of the projected numbers for California: 25.3 billion for our federal highways, 9.42 billion for public transportation, 4.2 billion for bridges, 3.5 billion for water infrastructure, 1.5 billion for airport infrastructure, 384 million for EV charging stations, at least 100 million for broadband, and 84 million to protect against wildfires. That's just California. So I would imagine those are pretty big numbers, Fred. So I would hope that we'd be feeling them sooner rather than later. Now, it's going to be up to me as the representative for the Central Coast to make sure we see our fair share of that. And so we're already starting to see that with some projected transit funding, 7 million to Salinas, 4 million to Seaside Monterey, 7 million to Santa Cruz, 3.7 million to Watsonville, 2.4 million to Gilroy Morgan Hill. That's just for transit funding that we're projected to see here. Airport funding, our Monterey Regional Airport, Watsonville Airport, Marine Airport, they're going to get anywhere from 159,000 to 2 million. So those are just some of the early estimates of the money that's going to be coming in here to help that type of infrastructure. Obviously, we want to make sure, and the one I've been fighting for is our water projects. And I was a little, I'll be frank, and I'll kind of share a story. I was a little disappointed that the first round of water project funding, the Pajaro flood project, did not get funded. So much so that I had to withhold my vote on a bill that the White House wanted because I was very PO'd. I was very disappointed. And so, but I wasn't disappointed because I want my money and that's it. No, that's not how it is. And if you guys know the Pajaro River Flood Project, we know that we've done our job. And it's not just me at the federal level. It's our state representatives. John Laird's done an amazing job. Zach Friend's done an amazing job. The city of Watsonville and the county of Santa Cruz have done phenomenal jobs working together, getting the Army Corps of Engineers to do its job. So we've really kind of come together and had a partnership at this level. We checked those boxes. We've crossed our T's, dotted the I's. The least that they could do is give us that money. That's why I was so mad that we didn't get it the first round. So I called the White House and said, I'm not voting for the Competes Act. Competes Act is a major bill, a major infrastructure, a major bill that we invest in our semiconductors, make them right here. They want it. They need it. I said, no, I'm not voting it. We got a slim majority. We can do that because they need as many Democrats as they can. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. This is why. And I let him know that. And I had a phone call with Mitch Landrieu, who's in charge of dispersing this infrastructure investment. And I let him know how disappointed we are. And next day, we had someone from the White House in my office. When I told them, I said, it shouldn't have to come to this. You need to realize we've done our job. We hope that you do your job. And so there's another round of funding coming up here. We do hope that the Pajaro Flood Project gets that money because, like I said, we want to meet the matching funds that the state has put up, thanks to John Laird on that as well. So, and based on all the work that everybody's done. Now, another infrastructure thing that you've probably heard about are community-funded projects. Quote unquote earmarks is what they're called. Now, thanks to the leadership of Steny Hoyer, the majority leader, who kind of grew up in Congress with these types of earmarks, he knows the benefit of these things. And if you're done in a very transparent and open way, as this process was done, you'll see basically projects, funding for projects in our community
like we just got. And so I'm proud to say that based on these community funded projects, as they're called, CFPs, I brought in $1 million to replace 27,000 water meters there in the city of Santa Cruz so we can better conserve water. I brought in $1 million for the Dientes Mid-Penn housing project that's going to happen there in Soquel. And I brought in $1 million for the rec trail goes from Lee's Crossing in Watsonville all the way out to Pajaro Valley High School so that kids can have an easier access to ride their bikes and get to school. So it's those types of things, those types of infrastructure projects that we're actually seeing, not just in the grand scale of the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that you talked about and that we mentioned, but also at a local scale. We're doing that through the budgetary process, which I believe is a great thing. Because we're actually seeing the benefits. And like I said, I think I told you this, in my first 4 years here in office, it was, I'd go to events with state legislators and they'd stand up there and say, we're doing this and we're doing this and we passed this bill and we're bringing in these projects to the Central Coast. And I'd stand up there and say, well, I'm yelling at Donald Trump. Now, with this administration and the majority that we have in the House and the majority that we have in the Senate, it's been nice to actually deliver things for the Central Coast.
Yeah, as a former state legislator, I know that feeling, both sides of that feeling. Having served with a Republican governor and a Democratic governor, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Let me ask about this. In my view, the federal government left the housing field decades ago.
Yeah.
And largely the remaining federal involvement, more or less, I'm oversimplifying this, is Section 8. Other than that, they've largely left the affordable housing field, leaving that then to the states. And states have been, shall we say, uneven in how they deal with housing and affordable housing and how the subsidies come together, which has largely been a market strategy where you're doing density bonuses and tax credits and so on to try to cobble together the ability to construct affordable housing, especially in the very low and low income categories. And it seemed to me in this current session of Congress that the federal government actually is expanding what has been its anemic role in housing in the United States. And I'm wondering if you see that this is a dawn of some kind of new day with the federal government recommitting itself to that activity.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. I mean, traditionally, housing has been sort of a local issue. We understand that. We also understand why. However, obviously, with the issues that we're facing, not just here in Santa Cruz or on the Central Coast, but with the problems that we see in affordable or workforce housing, however you want to call it, from Seattle to San Diego, and the homelessness problem that we're seeing from Seattle to San Diego, that you're actually seeing the federal government lean into it a little bit more, a lot of it more, to be frank. And that's a good thing. Obviously, you talked about the Section 8 housing. In my limited time, the numbers that we brought in over $100 million in homeless and housing programs here on the Central Coast. So the grant programs are still a big part of it and still have an impact on it as well. But before I get into what we're doing legislatively, at least, not within the pandemic, let's talk about what we did during the pandemic for homelessness and rental relief. And what you saw is basically a huge amounts of money coming in through the CARES Act, through the American Rescue Plan, these two big pieces of legislation that we passed to get us through the pandemic and get us to the point where we are now, where we can emerge from the pandemic, at least economically stable, but also health-wise, we're getting through it too. CBDG grants, the community development block grants, we brought in millions of dollars just here on the Central Coast. Rental assistance, the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, provided $19.1 billion in rental assistance throughout the country. Monterey County received $10 million. Santa Cruz County received $6.4 million just for rental assistance. And then obviously we had emergency housing and homelessness programs, 10 billion throughout the country. I think that was pretty instrumental. And that goes to your point that the federal government actually leaned into this a lot more than it has in the past. Now, legislatively, and especially with what you mentioned, the tax credits, that's what I'm trying to explain, is in being on the Ways and Means Committee that has purview over the tax code, that's our jurisdiction. We can adjust the low-income housing tax credits, which are very, very important to ensure there are incentives for developers to provide that type of housing project, the affordable housing project. Now, as you know, there's the 4% and there's the 9% tax credit, 4% for rehabilitation, 9% for new development. In my term in Congress, we've upped the 9% tax credits. We've upped the number of 9% tax credit by 12%. In the bill that you're talking about, the Build Back Better Act that's stuck in the Senate right now, our push is we passed it out of the House, stuck in the Senate, and I failed to, let me digress. That's where a lot of our environmental work is in the Build Back Better Act, and we can get into that. But in regards to housing, a lot of our housing push is in the BBB as well, because we knew how important it was to work on providing that support to working families. The BBB does that, and a big part of that was affordable housing. Now, in that package, we focused on low-income housing tax credits in upping the amount of 9% tax credits by 50%. And that's a lot, and that means a lot. However, and if anybody knows well, you do, and if anybody knows well, it's probably the people on this call, not just up to the federal government, it's up to our local governments to decide whether or not they want that type of housing in their areas, in their communities. So we can do as much as we can to bring that horse to water by providing these tax credits, by providing these funding for that programs. It's how the local government uses those tax credits, uses that funding. I mean, as you know, that's the biggest problem. It's supply and demand. And let me tell you, supply right now is real thin here on the Central Coast, especially when it comes to affordable housing. There's a couple other bills, just let me mention.
Sure.
When I first bought my house, I was able to get that first-time homebuyers tax credit. That went away in 2007. I have a bill with Earl Blumenauer to reintroduce that first-time homebuyer tax credit, so that when you buy a home, if you're a first-time homebuyer, you get a tax credit from the federal government up to $10,000, which I think is important. We actually made, we had it up to $10,000. We're now making it up to $15,000 in our bill, which I think is important. And then you're starting to see, and this is kind of neat, and it kind of goes to your point that the federal government's actually getting involved in this. You're seeing rental relief bills. And what I mean by that is you're seeing bills put forward, introduced, that basically say that if you're paying a third of your income towards housing, you should get a federal tax break. Now, the issue with those types of bills, Fred, well, the issue with most bills, as you know, is all about how you're going to pay for it. That's a very expensive bill. But I do think it shows that there are members of Congress who are leaning into this issue, not just when it comes to owning homes, but renting homes. And as we're seeing, rent in a lot of the housing areas are going through the roof now too. So we're starting to lean into it, starting to do something, but that's what's needed in this issue that really is affecting everybody. Like I said, I in these calls, I've never had so many people call for a no-fly zone, but and I get it. That was kind of the flavor of the month. But the fact is I think we understand what that means. We understand that, one, that's kind of a declaration of war, to be honest with you, because you are going to come in contact with Russian fighters. You're going to have American fighters going after Russian fighters. Therefore, you're going to have that type of escalation. The second reason is that in a no-fly zone, you're having our jets up in the airspace. Therefore, you need to take out any defensive anti-aircraft installations that are there that can track our jets. Therefore, guess what? Guess where those anti-air defense installations are? They're in Russia. We're going to have to knock those out, and therefore we're going to be knocking some things in Russia out. And so that's why a no-fly zone was a very, very complicated, understandable to say it, to think it, but just not the right thing to do. So how else can we fight against the Russian air barrage. Well, what you got to realize, though, and this is why another reason why a no-fly zone really wouldn't work, even if you took away the planes, the Russian planes, they're doing most of the bombardment now, the blind bombardment. They're doing that by missiles. They're doing that by artillery as well. And a no-fly zone wouldn't stop those. So, how do you deal with that? Well, look, I do believe we are doing a good job providing, obviously, the javelins and the stingers. Javelins are for kind of tanks, and the stingers are the air defense missiles. It's funny, I spoke with it's really interesting. I spoke with the only Russian parliamentarian that was in the United States a few weeks ago, Sasha Ustinova. We had a conversation. She's like, yeah, she's like, I'm talking to people in Ukraine. They're going to name their daughters Javelin and their boys Stingers. It's literally what they said. And I was a little bit incredulous, but I was just listening to something this morning. I guess there's something going around on Ukrainian social media of Saint Javelin, they're calling her. And so it tells you how much these mean to them. These types of armaments mean to the Ukrainian people. Like I said, at first I was like, oh, it's kind of, she's just using that hyperbole. No, I really think it tells you how much these types of armaments mean to these people. So in regards to air defenses, what else can we provide? The problem with the Stingers is that they're a short distance. And that's an issue. So you can't really get the airplanes that are of higher elevations. There are other ways to do that. And you're hearing discussions about that, like the air defense systems that are made in Soviet Union called S-300 and S-400s. They're the ones that we had an issue with Turkey actually buying a few years back and deploying, even though they couldn't deploy them because you still need certain radars to do them. And then I've heard, obviously, why can't we get Iron Dome? Well, look, it's a lot more, just like a no-fly zone, there's a lot more to these, very complicated to make them work. And that's the problem with these types of air defense systems is you not just have the armament itself, but you need the radar and the people to monitor them and to deploy them. And so it's a little bit more complicated than just having them. Now, there are these other armaments. There's this thing called the Star Streaker from the UK that is like a Stinger, but like a faster, more accurate, and longer range, sort of a surface to air type of weapon. So it's these types of weapons that we need to start getting in to the Ukrainian hands. Now, I am also for transferring of the MiG fighters, the Polish MiG fighters. Now, we heard about how that went down, and we're hearing that, well, the United States is stopping them. Well, the issue with that, what happened, my supposition based on who I've talked to and what I've read, is that the Poles and the EU got out ahead of the US on this one. In that before there were solid negotiations, the EU ministers were announcing this is going to happen. We're going to transfer them to the US, and the US is going to transfer them. And then a Polish minister made an announcement saying this is going to happen. And we're like, wait a second, this ain't going to happen because this could be seen as escalatory. And they're thinking, the United States thinking, and you understand that, because basically the air defense armaments that we're providing kind of can be constrained to Ukraine, okay? But if you start adding jets to the armament, then they can go beyond Ukraine. It can be a threat to Moscow. It can be a threat to Russia. And so you can understand how they can be seen as escalatory. However, I do believe that we should provide, like I said, the Ukrainians with as much as possible for them to defend themselves and fight back. And I think that we can do that by ensuring that they have these types of fighters. Let's just not do it as open. There's other ways that you can do it, not as escalatory, at least in the process of how you do it. And so, like I said, I think that's another way in which we can help them battle against the Russian air offenses. There are going to be a number of things that we're going to continue to do this. But like I said, we still have to counter against the missiles. We still got to counter against the artillery. And Russia has a lot more of that than the Ukrainians at this point. And that's why I see this as a war of attrition, to be frank. I see this as something that's going to last a long time. And therefore, our focus needs to be on two countries. It needs to be on providing the aid and the armaments to Ukraine to help them with this war of attrition, sort of I know you guys don't like hearing this, but a Charlie Wilson's War II for Ukraine. But then at the same time, we have to bleed Russia of the resources to wage this war. And not just economically, but emotionally as well. And what I mean by that is, how much longer can the people of Russia undergo the effects of this type of attrition? And what I mean by that is, you can hide this war from them only so long until these body bags of their sons start coming back to their homes throughout Russia. And you have to do these funerals. How much longer will they stand for that? How much longer will they stand for the economic consequences that we are inflicting upon Russia right now? That's to be seen. But I do believe that that's also where the pressure has to come from going forward.
Thank you. Let me steer us into another topic for a moment. And that is, you, like I did when I had the privilege of representing this area in the state assembly, you in the House of Representatives are always running for re-election. No sooner than the election is held, you're running again for re-election. So knowing that that's always on the mind of a United States representative, let me steer us into the 2022 general election on a national basis. So if you are a Democrat, my good friend, you are, and sitting there observing the national scene, there's still, COVID is not a distant memory. It's still present. There are a number of issues to deal with. The war between Russia and Ukraine has raised gas prices at home. Inflation is at least looking at the month-to-month inflation figures, the highest it's been in 40 years. The administration and Democrats in Congress can correctly pat themselves on the back with the infrastructure bill, with a number of issues around COVID to provide support for folks. You were talking about rental assistance and so on. The map for both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, understanding the common wisdom that the party in power loses some of that power in midterm elections, and that Democrats would not have to lose too much power in either the House or the Senate to become minority parties. How is it that Democrats put the brave face on the 2022 re-election and election cycle?
Let me just kind of sum it up. I listened to James Carville about 2 months ago when he was talking about this. We soldier on. That's what it comes down to. We just keep on soldiering on. We keep on doing our job. Now, what I mean by that is I was listening to the NewsHour last night. We had David Brooks and Capehart do their analysis, which I'd recommend. A lot of people these days ask me, what news source should I listen to get the real news? I'm a big NewsHour fan. Channel 9, 3 p.m. our time, especially on Fridays. You got Brooks and Capehart doing their analysis. It's awesome. So I have my staff clip it and send it to me, and I listen to it every Friday night, be it when I'm driving home from the airport. You know, they talked about a poll right now that says that Biden's polling numbers are horrible, okay? But then you look at what they like in regards to how he's dealing with Ukraine, and everything that the people like Biden's doing. His polling is still in the tank. It kind of makes you see that it is partisan. Brooks was saying, look, our country is very divided right now. And that no matter what Biden does, they're not going to like it, even though what he's doing, they agree with, if you separate it and ask about that. And my attitude is Biden still has to do what's right, despite the politics. He's got to do it for the policy and the people of Ukraine, and that's what he's doing. And I believe that we as Democrats, that's what we have to do going forward. We have to just continue to soldier on and remind people about the American Rescue Plan, that through that we kept our economy afloat, we kept our poverty rate flat, we kept us in the race between injection infections to deal with these variants that we're at. We did pass the IIJA. we did pass with the Competes Act, which is going to be basically coming up for a bill which says manufacture more semiconductors in America. We did pass a bill in Congress that was the largest investment in climate change and reducing our carbon output in human history. That's right now stuck in the Senate. Carville said you got to gloat and promote. I don't know about that, but you do got to talk about and remind people everything that we've done and everything that we hope to continue to do. Now, look, I know we got a lot going against us. You got tradition of the incumbent party, but usually losing an understanding, basically them being held accountable because of the problems that we're facing. You had redistricting coming up. Now, that actually turned out pretty good for Democrats, is what they're saying, especially here in California. We actually got a couple of Democrat districts back. And you're seeing the courts in other Republican legislatures in other states that have Republican legislatures that crafted Republican districts. Those are getting kind of shut down, which is good. You saw one, well, you did see one today, I think in Maryland, though. That was a Democratic legislature. A court overturned that, the Democratic lines. But you're seeing these, the courts kind of standing firm when it comes to the partisan gerrymandering in other states that happen. But I also think, look, we go ahead and we'll talk about those issues. Now, what they're going to want to bring up, especially they had the Republican Conference Caucus this past week in Florida. And, look, they're going to talk about inflation. They're going to talk about the border. They're going to talk about crime. They're going to talk about CRT, critical race theory. The one out of those, look, we can lean in on crime a little bit more. The president tried to do that in the State of the Union. I believe that he shouldn't just stand there and say something. He should remind them that the American Rescue Plan provided billions of dollars to cities that actually provided for the police. We funded the police. That's a bill that the Republicans voted against. Let's make sure Democrats voted for ARP, which helped fund police. Don't be afraid to lean into that a little bit more, if you ask me. But also on inflation. Look, that's going to be the tough one right there, Fred. Okay, you know that. If inflation remains high, to be frank, that's going to be very tough for us going into 2020.
Yeah, then James Carville's other dictum from 3 decades ago, it's the economy, stupid, gets brought forward into the present moment.
No, that's right. That's right. And look, this obviously makes me nervous, not just about the elections, it makes me nervous about our stance on Ukraine, because look, we're very unified right now. But how much longer is that unity going to last? People keep going to the pumps and paying $5, $6, $7 a gallon. But I also think it's our opportunity to do something about it. Look, there is no short-term fix for this, Fred. There's no button in the White House that says lower gas prices, and you can do that. There's so many dynamics outside of the government, outside of the United States, that affect gas prices. But I do believe it's an opportunity to remind people of our reliance on oil and gas and fossil fuels. And therefore, there should be this opportunity to pivot towards green energy, to make sure that we remind people that this is the way to go in the long run. So once again, though, this is our issue. We know this issue. We, I believe, just have to keep on talking about these issues. And I told you this last time. Once again, David Brooks said this, and this really scares the hell out of me, to be honest with you. And I think if you're a public servant or a politician, it should scare the hell out of you. And that people are going to punish politicians for doing bad, but not reward them for doing good. And I don't have the answer to that, Fred, because I think I get that, and you feel that a little bit. People have a short-term memory, and we kind of forget about some of the good stuff we do. But how you deal with that, my only solution is you keep on soldiering on.
Jimmy Panetta, I know that you have a big district. Some parts of it are new to you. And so I'm going to guess you have double-digit number of stops today all throughout your congressional district. So giving us over an hour of your time on a Saturday morning, we want to thank you. We do thank you. We thank you for your public service. We thank you for being so generous with your time, representing us so well. Representative Jimmy Panetta, thank you. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you sometime soon, I hope.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, everybody. We're lucky around here that we've had, and we can continue to have excellent public servants, kind of big shoes to fill. I like filling your shoes, Fred, because you've kind of set the right direction of how we do things around here. It kind of starts off with, what we talked about with our Santa Cruz Warriors. We understand what it means, not just to do your job in Congress or do your job on the basketball court. We got to do our job in this community. And if anybody's lived up to that, it's you. So thanks for setting the example for all of us. We really appreciate it.
You're very kind. Thank you, sir. Best wishes to you. We'll see you soon. I want to thank the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at California State University, Monterey Bay for your continued support and presentation of this program. I want to thank the students who attend this and have been attending for over a decade now. This is a wonderful process we go through once a month, a few times a year. If you enjoyed today's program, Inside California Politics with Fred Keeley, you can make a donation to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at California State University, Monterey Bay, and that will be put to good use.